One of the things that has been sort of interesting, speaking with Yasmin and Chad, one thing we've been noticing, and I think Scratch really encapsulates it, we've kind of moved from tools to make programming more palpable, more creative, more collaborative, to sort of this ongoing presence of communities. And the Scratch website, I think, really captures that, and this idea that was brought up this morning about the nature of Remix and something that's been talked about through multiple sessions. The idea that it's not just enough to have tools in which to do it. You can download the Scratch tool, but if you really want to immerse yourself and begin to tinker and begin to play and get creative with it, that community up online is so invaluable. So we kind of are going off this right now, and one thing we've seen over the last 2 to 3 years is this idea of video game challenges, whether it's Global Warrior, or Kodu, which is now getting a lot more of an online presence, CS2N, which is sort of an umbrella for multiple different challenges, and then of course the Games for Change Festival. All these different competitions are being out there encouraging young people to get on board, create video games, get creative, get collaborative, and begin to post and share online. We took a look at one of these, the National STEM Video Game Challenge, which of course has sort of a little bit more gravitas in the sense that they say it comes from President Obama himself and delivered from the White House. I don't know, by show of hands, has anybody heard of it or partaken in it? Okay, nice. It's sort of unique in some senses that the STEM Video Game Challenge doesn't say, here's the tool, we're going to have you use Scratch. Use Scratch, you can use Alice, you can use Yo-Yo Games, Game Maker, you can use GameStar Mechanic. So they're not particular about what tool you want to use. They just want you to create a STEM-based game. Now at the website, I think the second iteration has got a little bit more involved than the first, but when we got involved with it, we were working with the middle schoolers, so we went to the website, we took a look at some of the last year's winners. 2 of the 10 middle school teams or individuals who won last year used Scratch. Apparently there was about 600 total entries in the first initial year that ran. Out of those 600, there were 10 middle school winners, and so 2 of them had actually used Scratch. For the middle schoolers, the award was $2,000 for their schools and a laptop, which was going to be replete with video game software. So that was sort of the carrot, nice carrot, at the end of the road as far as if you did, in fact, win the actual challenge. I'm actually just going to play a video here. I had it embedded, but it wasn't quite working. So this is a video that we had just recently produced about the video game challenge. You're going to see me speaking as well as Yasmin and Chad, and more importantly, the students who actually participate.
Scratch is a programming and like video game creator thing where you pull commands into a box to make things happen.
Teaching basics of programming is a really useful skill.
A lot of people like it, and there's different things like computers, stuff like that.
We are at Penn Alexander, which is a K through 8 school that's in partnership with the University of Pennsylvania. And so this is our virtual arcade day with middle school students who took our Scratch Toys class, and they've been programming video games for the last 6 months or so, 20 days, to enter the National STEM Video Game Challenge.
I think the biggest challenge for the kids was really trying to get a clear idea of what science, math, and technology could look like in a type of game like this.
Nearly all of the games which the kids have designed draw from their experiences in other classrooms, and it's a great example of how we can kind of integrate learning programming in school with other curricular activities.
The nice thing about the STEM Video Game Challenge is that the kids were actually out there sharing their stuff with each other. Not only in the classroom, but we had the virtual arcade and the lab day, so they were sharing with their peers, but then of course there was also the Scratch website, and then the STEM Video Game website where they posted all their projects.
They can actually post the games online and can see what other kids have designed of their same age range and get a better idea on what's kind of possible to do.
Kind of get over the concept. kind of like a small like robot puppy creature. It likes to eat a lot, especially a lot of junk food. So I might have like kind of add like a health stick to it. So he's trying to destroy all the junk food so that he doesn't get like sick or anything.
Well, at first I was just thinking like type someone to make sure we know some different platforms and go through portals. And for me to incorporate STEM, I had to add math problems, so that's kind of like how I did it.
You play as a lysosome. Your cell is getting invaded by germs. You have to dissolve them with enzymes before they reach your nucleus.
The mentors were there because I needed help about like which variable I needed or where I could find certain things, and the students were helpful too, especially the ones that had more experience.
We were learning a lot of things in science that could have been used in there. We were just like really trying to focus on something that would be fun for us.
And for the people who made Scratch, I think that they did a great job and it's so much fun. Like I go on Scratch when I'm at home just with free time. I won't play video games, I'll make video games on Scratch. I think Scratch is great because it's kinda like if you want to move into coding, like I do when I get older, Scratch is like a great gateway to kind of get into it.
Okay. So, that was a bit of just sort of, most importantly, I think you got to see a little bit of the games themselves, but also hear from the students. But to sort of problematize, that was a little bit of a PR piece too there, obviously, to sort of talk a little bit about some of the study that we did and talk about some of the things that we felt were good, but also say, well, if we did this again, what would we learn? We were really intrigued. I taught English in Philadelphia Public Schools for about 5 years. I had participated a lot of times in writing competitions, and so making this jump to step for STEM was kind of an interesting jump for me, and not an area I was completely and totally familiar with, but I was really intrigued by this idea of competition. And instead of getting through this traditional dichotomy of student to teacher, we could talk about getting a little bit more of a wider audience and use this challenge to sort of get kids kind of geared up and excited about something that's bigger than traditional school environments. Would it work? Well, we had two big questions. Can competitions be leveraged to really get STEM coursework more integrated, more meaningful to children? And obviously there's a big push on that in national and local fronts right now. And second, what do we learn about audiences through this type of competition? I'm not going to get too much into participants. We had 17 participants. The school itself had about 50% qualified for Title I. So we were not in some elite school at all. It represented a nice balance of students. We had less girls than boys. It was an elective course, okay? So it wasn't a STEM class. We only met twice a week. So even though I'm using this term class quite a bit, it wasn't a 5-day-a-week traditional class. It was an elective class. It was a STEM class, but it was an elective nonetheless. And then we did hour-long workshops as we met. When it came to sort of organizing this, we sort of had a design-based approach. This was the first time that we were doing this in the first place. So we opened every session with sort of this round table where everyone would bring their chairs in. And there was two focuses in these opening round tables, especially over the first month that we were working with kids. And that was talking about what we meant by STEM-based learning. I think STEM is a term that maybe we all get in this room, but kids don't refer to their classes as STEM. At least they don't. They call it life science, or they call it earth science, or they call it biology. So STEM to them in this STEM-based challenge was a little bit more of a jump. Well, what do they mean by STEM? Well, we could explain what the acronym meant, but it was sort of harder for kids to sort of get their minds around that. Looking at and working with some of the teachers there, we sort of got an overview of what the children did in terms of math and science over 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, which were our participating years for kids. But we were also just trying to get a sense of how to talk to the kids about what they actually had experienced on those grade levels. The second big issue that was kind of going on at the same time, what is a good game? Anybody who's worked with Scratch and creating video games, you know that a lot of times these 8th graders come in and they want to do Call of Duty in 2 weeks. So it's always a little bit hard to be able to navigate that. What is a good game and what games do you like, but also what is feasible? So in the process of addressing this question of what is STEM, we're also questioning this game of what is a good game. And then the worst or the hardest part, I would say the worst part, but the most tricky part was how do you get STEM good video games? How do those two different things come together? So the Scratch website was actually instrumental. The National Video Game Challenge site doesn't have any of the winners' games actually posted. They name who won, but they don't post the games themselves. So going into the website, we took a look at a lot of sample games, and we found about a good half dozen games that we really felt, A, had good gameplay, but also, whether it was weather or geographic formations, really encapsulated some good game, fun skills. And those were our sort of samples as we move forward, especially over that first month. The other question that wasn't as pronounced is, what do we mean by collaboration? Over the first month, it was inevitable. We both came in, Chad and I both have been teachers for a number of years, so I think we fell back into the teaching mode fairly easily. But that also had the downfall of that, at least for the first month we were there, everything was always coming through us. Mr. Moat, Mr. Burke, how do you guys want me to do this? How do you guys want me to do this? So over the first month, we weren't really breaking that traditional student-teacher dichotomy. But maybe that was okay. What we ended up designing this is that we admitted that over the first month that was the way it was going to be. But then we started using the website, and we did something called a gallery walk, which they do sort of an architecture of everyone going around and posting online comments on each other's projects, which was actually very helpful for the students in getting them up and going at the website. Because while they liked to look at games on the website, they were a lot more hesitant. Even after they created usernames and passwords for the website, they actually posted stuff at the website. That was a bigger jump for them. We also had the privilege of external visitors. Just through Penn and a number of connections we had over on the west side of the city, we got 3 different people to come in, staggered over 4 weeks. One was a design technologist from New York City Public Schools. One was a computer programmer who actually had graduated from Penn and had worked on a number of films, which got the kids especially excited. One of them called a number of the kids had actually seen. And then the last was a previous judge who had to work with actually Scholastica games, and he came and gave some pointers and looked at individual games. So we were very privileged by that. The last thing that was sort of a scaffold, so to say, was this final in-class arcade in which the whole middle school was invited to come into the room that last day and play the various games, post comments on note cards we had placed alongside, and put them online. So we actually had an extended session, so every single one of their middle school colleagues could come in and play one of these 17 games. That was particularly important to the kids. So let me just talk a little bit about the games, and I'll talk a little bit about the audiences, and then close-up shop. Integrating STEM games in school, well, there's sort of an issue here, and this is came out really carefully. You saw in the video, one was a jetpack where you had 20 plus 20, you had to fly to 40. That's what we call, and Tom Malone came up with this term of sort of exogenic and endogenic, which is a little jargony, but exogenic games are typically the games we've used in schools in the past, Jeopardy-style games, or one from my own past, where you have to learn how to type fast to make your car go faster than the other cars. We're talking about very surface-level things. This is the type of stuff that schools generally like, though, because it still can be teacher-centric. It's surface-level, so that means the instructor is comfortable knowing what you're knowing, and you're not really losing the kids into the screens. So they have some benefits. Endogenic games, now Oregon Trail, of course, we all know, and while we probably could make some tongue-in-cheek kind of comments about the Oregon Trail, in some ways it was a very good example of an early endogenic game. I mean, kids were sort of learning the fact that you got dysentery on this trail, and then having nothing to its clothes and fording rivers. I'm not saying that it really captures it, but it had a lot more of an immersive quality. So why does this exogenic and endogenic matter? This is one of the biggest issues for kids. Playing games is one thing with exogenic and endogenic, but making a game that actually is endogenic tended to be a lot more difficult. We had 16 out of our 17 kids actually have a final game for an upload, which was great. I mean, the level of persistence to get to that point was tricky in many times. Only 6 of the participants really created games that we would qualify as endogenic. We had sort of a scale for this. But over here, we saw the taco game in which you, based on sort of Space Invaders, where burritos were replacing aliens, and then your cholesterol hit a certain level and you keeled over. Well, okay, it was fun, and it was good, and it certainly was nice and playable. We qualified that as being very exogenic. I mean, in some ways you might learn that burritos and tacos, but that was 6th, 7th, and 8th graders all had a pretty good idea about that stuff anyway, and it was sort of a surface level thing. Likewise, I think I got a little bit better with the cellular attack, because the virulency of your attackers was sort of corresponding to the virulency of the viruses that were going after you. So there was in there. But the two games that really stuck out was sort of a genome project that by tampering with the actual genomes, you could actually change eye color and hair color and skin color. And then probably the one that even though it had sort of limited graphics, was a game called Enderbuild, which Brad had worked on and really created how to mine in season. And you had to have some fundamental knowledge of seasons and when to build crops, and how to use raw materials to harvest these crops. And those games really kind of got into the endogenic kind of quality. All games, regardless of whether they fell on exogenic or endogenic, did cover a number of programming concepts. This is courtesy of Scrape Analysis. Mr. Wolfson is here today to tell you more about that. But it's a fantastic way of being able to pull out what is actually going on in terms of programming in all these games. And as you can see here, we've got a number of important coding concepts that were used very well by kids across the board. I'm not going to get too much into that just for the sake of time right now. But in terms of audience, we did some post-workshop surveys as well as interviews. 57% of the participants really found that their fellow classmates were the most important factors. And that was a very promising thing to us, because that was one of the things we really wanted to get away from, especially given that first month where Chad and I were looking at each other and saying, they're still using us for everything. That decreased over the final 2 months, especially with that in-class arcade over the final day. 36% obviously said us as instructors, and it says 7% listed the STEM game challenge. I'm not going to go through Hannah's whole quote here, but I think one of the things that he was expressing, and I think a number of children really felt as well, and sort of leaned out by our field notes, is that this idea that when they had to show that final arcade game to their friends that last day, they really didn't want their games to suck. And that was a very important motivation for all of them. And to tell you the truth, it got them, there was a couple of late nights even over that last week that really made that happen. Just as far as takeaways and next steps, well, we only got 1/3 integrating this endogenic. Eric Wolfer, who's over here at MIT, as well as colleagues, Katie Salem, they make a point that you can't start with the games, you can't start with the concept. You've got to start with the games and the concept at the same time. We did not do that. I didn't read that before I started this. I probably shouldn't right now. But the idea here is that you need to be able to have concepts very close at hand, and you need to also give them maybe, whether it's a platform or a scrolling game, give them some templates by which they can work off of. In that sense, yeah, I think getting this into a particular unit and not having outside teachers, or I was a researcher at that time, getting it into an actual unit is going to be a lot more useful, I think, because the STEM concepts are going to be that much more palpable, and if you have some platforms, then you can better get those into it. So that was one takeaway we had. The other takeaway was that, in terms of audience, this came up this morning with the keynote a bit, but I don't think we need to be afraid of instructors taking the role at first, but to constantly push that role out. We had the privilege of being able to bring in outside visitors. Not all educators are going to have that. But what we found is by sort of pushing out audiences gradually, we were able to get the kids a lot more enthused about finally sharing it with their peers. And what ultimately became the case is that the $2,000 in the laptop, while the kids were kind of jazzed about that for the first 2 weeks, that went to the background. At the end of the day, it was really what they had to show each other that was going to be the real impetus. And in that sense, I think it's telling. Only one child really said that the STEM video game challenge did a whole lot for them. These challenges are good, but as I said, $2,000 in a laptop, if you're a 7th grader, this stuff might mean something for a couple of days, but then you're off to something else. What's really going to make this stuff work is getting platforms to share. And in some ways, the STEM Video Game Challenge and any of these competitions that occur can take pages from the Scratch website. You need to have forums. You need to have places where you can post drafts. You need to be able to connect kids, not just within schools, but within a wider community. So I think moving forward, one of the things that we really would like to do is really push some of these challenge sites to start creating more diverse sites. We only were able to pull a sample project by going into the STEM website, or the Scratch website. Nothing was available online. So as far as next steps, I think that I'm not knocking the STEM Game Challenge. I think one of the things they did really well this year is they gave teachers more time this year and a better understanding of maybe how they could integrate into their classrooms. But over year 3, I think getting these forums and spaces to share drafts is the next real imperative. And also, before I run out of time, make it more transparent. Right now, 10 winners got posted just recently. None of our kids won, which is okay. But we have no idea who won and why. We just know they won. So give some rubrics out there because it matters for the kids. Because the kids want to ask us these same questions, and we don't have answers either. But looking forward to your questions, and thanks very much. Fantastic. But if you're going to have two, if you're going to engage in pair programming, if you're going to have two people collaborating together, you need to get them all on the same page. And it's very difficult in Scratch to share the same code base. So we're offering this worksheet, set of worksheets as a framework that will enable that kind of planning. It will also enable the sort of the documentation of decision making, ad hoc decision making, which would be a kind of a tinkering exercise. And then the I'm still getting ahead of myself. I think that's the next sheet. Next slide. Okay, that's fine. And then so basically the ad hoc, the documentation of process, and then reflection statements. So you have something, not only the program to reflect upon, but you also have the documentation of the process that you got there with to reflect upon, right? And so there's opportunities for learnings throughout that. And then I'll throw I'll very quickly page through the worksheets and see how they look. Oops. Right. There are 7 worksheets, and I think they're really uninteresting. Because they are rectangles inside of them. Right? So we have a rectangular, and so I feel very sort of modest and humble about this right now. And they're rectangles. They're carefully considered rectangles. They are a 4:3 aspect ratio. The Scratch display window, the Snap display window, and the Scratch 2.0 display window are 4:3. If your learner draws in this rectangle, they can reproduce what's inside the rectangle inside the display window in Scratch. Hence, less opportunity for disappointment along the way. You will not do Lawrence of Arabia in a 4:3. It is a 2:1, more or less. Right? So here we've got one letter size for the Europeans. It's roughly A4. It's 8.5 by 11, and it's got a 4:3 rectangle in it. It's measured in millimeters, so if you are able to print it out at precisely 100%, you'll actually have a sensible millimeter measurement that can map back out, to other uses. This one, each grid unit is 10 pixels on the screen. Millimeters are brilliant. I don't know why we're not using them. And so that way, if you're able to draw a sprite here and you want it to move 10 pixels, you know what that's going to look like. And that can be useful. What this is a set of spaces for possibility to play out that will resonate strongly with Scratch and Scratchers. Every grid unit is 20 pixels. Every grid unit is 40 pixels. So we have different scales of motion that we can model. And so this is a modeling environment as well. This is a planning sheet so that we have each one of the 4 screens or scenes available to us. So we have an intro or splash screen, we have a gameplay screen that can be sketched out very, very quickly. Low, what are we calling it? Low risk in terms of failure, right? So these can be disposable. And then 2 outcome screens. So again, rectangles, rectangles, rectangles. This one is perhaps the more interesting one. If your learner wants to do a narrative kind of presentation, they will want to make characters and character design. So a little rectangle to put the character design in as a thumbnail sketch, very, very quick, but then to start putting attributes below. And my suggestion is that the attributes should start with the phrase, I am blank, and I want to blank, 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 blank. The I want to will translate into code, and this practice actually maps well into object-oriented programming practices and object-oriented programming planning. And so then what we have is the interplay between these characters or objects
and objects in the abstract sense, or objects like a stone as well. 8 seconds, I'm at 10 minutes here. I'm going to go a little bit long. And then we have a storyboard sheet in the collection as well. Now, storyboards are an Storyboards are an imperfect planning tool for games because though they're familiar and comfortable for film, the filmic narrative is a linear narrative. Games are branching. Games have decision points and branching points. We can use a structure similar to storyboard as long as we give ourselves the freedom to draw arrows from one rectangle to another and say, well, you know, when I get to this scene, I need there's 2 or 3 decision points in here. So I'm going to have arrows that go every which way, or go to point B or point C from here in the case of this, right? So much more useful, but I have not included in here yet, might be flowcharts of some sort. If you can flowchart a rectangle to another rectangle. Electronic Arts, EA, the big game developer, uses flowcharting of game narrative, and they use entire walls to pin up scenes, concept art for scenes, and then illustrate the branching structure in physical space before they go into the virtual coding. And so this reflects actual video game development practice on a larger scale. And then I've got the license page up in there. This is all going to be it's Creative Commons attribution, non-commercial, share alike. I also have included the Adobe Illustrator files in the distribution and SVG files in the distribution, so you guys can remix and extend and print at high quality. Questions? Get past these fast. Proportion, what's in the package? What's in the package? Inside the distribution is also the .sv, which is the video. I've created an imperfect video game and slides for how to use them as part of the distribution. And the game is called Hula Girl and Pirate. It's based on a couple of pieces of plastic that I used to teach from. Very quick drawings that translate the Hula Girl and the Pirate. And then Hula Girl, so pirate character, I am a pirate, I walk the plank, I fall, I can land on a raft, I sink in water, I can be eaten by a shark. Now there's some dynamic scoping going on here as well, in that there's some stuff that's just too complex given the amount of time that I had to develop the video game that we're using here. And then that was a teaser for how to do the storyboard flowchart. So what got programmed in the imperfect game is the upper left-hand corner square. What could have happened is, okay, a detail over here, wouldn't it be great if there's a shark going on and knocks the raft over? What happens if a pirate falls? Well, he comes here and he comes here. So there's actually an implicit branching. I didn't put the arrows in. For what happens going toward one dimension of time versus another dimension of time. And then what could have happened before he has to walk the plank, some other unprogrammed potential. What do the 4 screens look like? So we've got the splash screen, victory screen, loss screen, gameplay screen, to demonstrate, small video game and then I used Inkscape to develop the art as a vector, and then they get turned into pings and dropped into Scratch. So there she is. I put little highlights in her eyes to get her all, Japanese manga. And let's launch the game really fast, just so we can say, hey, yeah, it's there. Pirate.
It's also on the Scratch website.
The video game is on the Scratch website under Hula Girl and Pirate. My username is Sweat. Long story, ask me later after here. It is also part of the I have zip files on the Scratch Ed website, and it's inside of the zip file. And the one that's on my URL is also all zipped up, so that you get one zip file of everything. So, what's it play like, Raphael? Let's take a look. It's purposefully imperfect because the game itself is also a teaching tool to allow a learner to say, pardon the language, that game sucks. And you say, well, that's not good enough. Why does it suck? What would you do better? And so that it's to get them to immediately start modding this particular code. So press spacebar to begin. Hula Girl is being controlled by key clicks, and she comes over, and she's got to catch the pirate before he falls into the water. Right, boom. And then victory is not secured until he's all the way over here. And this is part that's broken, and it's sort of obvious to everyone in the room. Wait 5 minutes. And it's also possible to lose. You can snatch defeat from the jaws of victory by. And then the victory screen is also sort of enacted where they're happy and there's a sunset. I couldn't program the shark. And yeah, she can die. She can fall off the raft if you click it wrong. You can. Yeah. So that had to be part of the puzzle.